everyone. My name is Giovanni Valderas. I'm the exhibitions manager at the Fort Worth Community Arts Center. And today we have Julie England with us. And Julie, please feel free to share a little bit about yourself.
I'm a second career artist, returned to school back in about 2011 to study art, and went to both Brookhaven and SMU. 2 years ago, started working on this particular body of work.
How did that come about, returning to school later in life?
Now, I had a first career. I have an engineering degree, spent many years in the semiconductor industry, and upon early retirement, decided to do something I always had a passion for. And I knew from the beginning I wanted to be an oil painter. So it was very intentional to learn oil painting from all the various professors I came across in the classroom.
Given your immediate connection to landscape painting, could you describe your human connection to the environment and what draws you so close to it?
Well, I realized from early childhood, I was actually born in the middle of Wisconsin. Out in the country is where we lived, and the property was a pine plantation. And because there were no children nearby that I could walk to and visit, my friends were the trees. And I would sit along these furrows, row after row of trees, and make up, imaginary friends until my little brother came along. And this was kind of a theme. My parents continued to, they would move around a lot, and we moved 7 times in my first 13 years, and we typically landed in rural locations.
Could you describe what it is that attracts you to the landscape of New Mexico so much?
Looking back in time, I spent a lot of time in West Texas, attending Texas Tech and working in Lubbock, Texas. I had started vacationing in New Mexico and got exposed to Ruidoso and Santa Fe and Taos, to those experiences. And then as the time passes, we ended up having a second home in Santa Fe. I started contributing to the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum. I was fortunate enough to be on the board of trustees of the O'Keeffe Museum while I was, in business in an engineering firm here in town. And then as I retired and started going back to school, I realized I would like to combine my love of technology, the New Mexico landscape, the relationship I had with the O'Keeffe Museum into some sort of large, final project for my schoolwork, but also that would launch me into a body of work that I could stick with for 2 or 3 years. And that's what's happened. After those discussions with the O'Keeffe Museum, the curator flew a drone so he could document the sites that they own, both her Ghost Ranch property and her Abiquiu property. And as a result of that, those photos that he shared with me on Dropbox have been the inspiration for this body of work.
A lot of your work has a lot of gestural movement in them. And
yes.
There was something that I think for me was really interesting, and when I talk to painters about the choices you make when experimenting with reduction and in regards to like shapes. And I was wondering, what is that thought process like when you're making
it evolved over the course of the body of work. 2 years ago in the summer, I started monotyping with oil. And when you monotype with oil, it has to be very quick. I reduced the palette so that I could paint in a very short amount of time so that all the oil still remains wet. And the marks become more intuitive. You have less time to think about them. And then you run it through the press and you get a surprise in that transformation. But by doing that, it helped me synthesize what are the key shapes and what kind of marks make this image more important. I would repeat my monotyping of the same image multiple times so I could experiment. I also experimented with surfaces, moving from UPO paper, which has a staining quality. The pigment adheres to the surface in a very interesting and highly illuminated way.
I believe in your artist statement, you mentioned, trying to capture the energy from nature and space and landscape. What is your process like when you're thinking about that?
Well, I think one of the key things an artist does when they encounter the landscape is they have to make decisions about what to include and what to exclude, because it is a little bit overwhelming. I was inspired to paint aerial perspectives by the Georgia O'Keeffe paintings of clouds, where she first encountered travel from the air, and she started to look down on the land and the clouds in the sky. I realized, you know, it's up to us, the artist, to make those decisions, and that makes it personal. So there's a sense of identity on the choices I made as I painted these aerial landscapes. There's a connection a lot of us feel to the stark arid landscape. You either have it or you don't. I'm one of those people that has it. I enjoyed living in West Texas and visiting New Mexico, and I think I'm going to carry that forward in my future work. There's something both timeless and timely about the mountains. I mean, in a sense, you know, they've been there for a millennium, but if you go back to the same place, that year after year, they don't look the same. So you realize time is moving, but they're standing still. They're also eroding and changing, you know, the outer shape. And that duplicity of timelessness, but entropy needs to be captured when one's painting the landscape. I think this starkness and the lack of green is what attracts me to the New Mexico landscape.
And so this is obviously one of the aerial photos that you're talking about earlier, correct?
Yes, this is a really good example of accomplishing a sense of dryness in the landscape and with the painting. And then I left the background as ambiguous as possible. You can either think that's sky in the very back edge or vertical walls of the cliffs. And then you see coming forward the undulations of the hills or the mountains as you get closer to the viewer. And I like that dynamism and the sense of being like a bird flying over this landscape, observing it. So to me, that creates a sense of freedom. So the way I paint is I will have 3 or 4 paintings in process, a lot of stepping back and observing, a lot of, in this case, drawing between those layers. Because in this case on UPO, I'm trying to keep as much transparency and luminosity as possible without making everything opaque.
And I feel like this undulating line work is really great and really beautiful, and allowing yourself to have that intuitive kind of knowledge to put down a stroke like that, or courage almost.
Yeah, that's pretty, yeah, I agree with you. That's pretty courageous. Yeah, the mark making is important, and in the dry brush work, you get one shot. I mean, you cannot generate that dryness wet on wet. I think in a gallery like what you provided at Fort Worth Community Arts Center, I don't have a space that big and luscious to hang all this work together, and now they can have a conversation with each other. So it's a wonderful opportunity. I'm very grateful to Fort Worth Community Arts Center for this opportunity. So I hope the viewer enjoys the brief sojourn to the New Mexico area, and that you have this sense of place and the emotion of being in the landscape and surrounded by it. If you have a little bit more time, just maybe comparing work on the UPO versus the canvas to the monotype. And there are several examples where all 3 are sharing the same image, but different interpretations.
Well, we can't wait to see what else you come up with, and thank you so much for taking your time to visit with us today and make this video.